I mean, I grew up on a horse ranch, but I had no interest, and I had no education or no experience with farming whatsoever. I was a young man and got into the entertainment space and spent 35 years in that business as an executive, and worked for film studios, and worked for music publishing companies, and worked in the ringtone business when it was an infant back in the day. Did that for a couple of years, and it was a very interesting ride. But I always, a large part of my job was always looking for talent, whether they were songwriters, producers, or film composers. So a lot of my job was entertaining people and getting to know them. So I did have a very legitimate expense account, and so I got quite used to eating good fresh foods and drinking really good wines with those foods. And that sort of led me into like, you know what, I think I really would like to learn more about this. And now at the age of 62, and I'm semi-retired now, I've fallen in love with making wine and growing grapes. And over the last couple of years, I started going back to a community college here in the Santa Maria Valley called Allen Hancock College.
Which we're on the way to.
Right now.
In the rain.
Yeah, in the rain. Thank God for the rain, which we've been missing for the last 4 or 5 years. And I'm really enjoying what I've learned at this college, and wanting to pass it on. And I enjoy working with the students, and now I'm an assistant to the vineyard manager and an assistant to the winemaker. So I started about 10 years ago, and we were lucky enough that we had a lot of cows that had been, pooping on the property over a 35-year period. So the natural nitrogen and nutrients in the ground was really good for grapes. And I didn't know it at the time, but when we started making wine, the wines were just coming out beautifully, and we didn't have to doctor them. We didn't have to add any additional superfood or nutrients or anything. We just would add yeast to the wine, and the wine would make itself. And then over the years, I started to learn that winemakers, when they would source fruit from other vineyards, that they would constantly be challenged with having to add nutrients to the yeast to make sure that the yeast would push through its process of converting the grape juice into wine. And I learned after that there was something called YAN, Y-A-N, which stood for yeast, or does stand for yeast available nitrogen. So I then learned that when you would crush your grape juice and then send a sample off to the laboratory would come back and give me a YAN reading of anywhere from 350 parts per million to sometimes 400 or 500 parts per million. And I quickly learned from other winemakers that was a phenomenally,
something to be desired.
Very much desirable, and it was a great advantage for winemakers in making their wine. So I have always strived to make sure that during the dormant season and during the root flushes and the growth periods in the vineyard, that we really pay attention to putting the right kind of fertilizers and the right kind of nutrients in the soil, and making sure that we flush the soil with good water and get rid of the salt, so that we really have a great chance to grow exceptional fruit. So this last year, I had a very well-to-do winemaker show up, and he wanted to buy some of my fruit. And he said, Mike, your fruit looks beautiful, better than most that I've seen around the area, but I think you have too much fruit hanging on the vine. And there is a philosophy, and it's probably a lot of merit to it, but they say the less fruit on the vine, the better the wine will be, because the energy that the plant is producing to produce the fruit, if there's less fruit there, then the quality of the fruit should be better. So he said to me, I've got an apprentice here that wants to buy wine, and he wants to make wine, he wants to buy your grapes, but I'm going to let him buy your grapes and see how he does. I said, okay, fair enough. So his apprentice bought 2,000 pounds of grapes, and they crushed into them the grape juice, and this exceptional winemaker came over and looked at the grape juice and said, "My God, the color in that fruit is so much better than the same grape that I bought from another grower." And he said, "You know, I'm shocked because that Grenache is usually troublesome when it comes to getting that kind of color." And then a couple of days later, the apprentice sent some grape juice into the lab, and the laboratory called him up and said, "Where did you get this fruit?" And he told them that he got it from me, and they said, "This fruit is the best quality fruit we've seen from anybody so far that's been bringing in lab samples here."
Wow.
And the apprentice said, "You know, so what's the Yan?" And they said the Yan is 375 parts per million, which is just considered to be perfect, balanced, nutrient fruit.
So you grow Grenache and what else?
Tempranillo and Garnacha Blanca. So the plan for Sandoval Ranch and Vineyard is to continue to do everything that we can, which is very expensive, but to do everything we can to create perfectly balanced fruit and sell it to up-and-coming winemakers who are not experts and have not gone to school, but are fascinated with the art of making wine, and sell them, or be able to sell them, quality fruit that gives them a better chance at making, as a beginner, a high-quality wine to help promote their interest, and then, over time, and by going to school, they can learn all of the tricks, if you will, of the trade that a lot of winemakers have to use to make their wines push through the process of fermentation by adding vitamins, nutrients, and other things to successfully push the fermentation through grape juice into wine. I've been making wine now for about 10 years, and I started off by making wine from a grape juice concentrate kit, and I made 5 gallons, and it was awful. And then I said, I've got to try this again, and I made it again, another 5 gallons the next year, and it was awful. And then I said, I got to plant my own grapes, and then I ended up planting a couple of hundred Tempranillo grapevines, and that was the beginning. And now at 3,000 vines and 3 different varietals, we are, pushing ahead with room to plant another 3,000 vines eventually one day.
Don't tell me I've nothing to do.